The Old Testament reading is 1 Kings chapter 19, beginning with the first verse. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, and he arose and went for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, else the journey will be too great for you." And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. And there he came to a cave and lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and slain your prophets with the sword. And I, even I, only am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind rent the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thy altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu you shall anoint to be king over Israel, and Elisha you shall anoint to be prophet in your place." So he departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he was with the 12th. Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him, and he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, "Let me kiss my father and my mother, then I will follow you." And he said to him, "Go back again, for what have I done to you?" And he returned from following him and took the yoke of oxen and slew them and boiled their flesh with the yokes of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. And he arose and went after Elijah and ministered to him. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thank you, Cameron, for that reading. This is one of my favorite Bible stories, and there are various aspects of it that we could talk about. One I would call location, location, location. The story happens on the heels of one of those religious stories in the Bible that people love and they should not. So what the story is Elijah is there on Mount Carmel, and he has a contest against the Canaanite priests, the Canaanite prophets. He's got some razzle-dazzle. He calls down fire, and then he annihilates the Canaanites. And religious people will cheer over this kind of thing. God does not, and it's proven in this story, because Elijah winds up alone and hungry, and God says to him, I'm not in the fire, I'm not in the storm, I'm not in the razzle-dazzle, and I'm certainly not in the annihilation of your foes. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs taught us about this. It's sort of a warning against those who get overzealous for God and are willing to let their religion harm others. God's not in all that. God's in the quiet. God's in the stillness. God's in the still small voice. I can't preach on this without telling a story that I know some of you have heard before, but you got to humor me if you've heard it before. It's a father-daughter story. It's Father's Day. It pertains to 1 Kings 19. I would not have counted myself, as my kids were growing up, as someone who thought, I hope my children grow up and get tattoos. That just wasn't a thing. So on my daughter's 25th birthday, we're having lunch. We're sitting outside, April the 2nd, having a beautiful time, and we're about done, and then she says, Dad, I have something to tell you. I said, what is it? She said, I got a tattoo. I'm kind of processing this. She asked, would you like to see it? I did not know the answer to this question. She pulled her hair back and she said, look, I looked on the neck, right under her ear, it looks like a dark smudge. She said, you're the only dad on the planet who can understand this tattoo. I looked at it, Hebrew letters. She said, read them. I said, Kol Damama Daka. She said, translate it. I knew. It's the still small voice. The still small voice. She said, Dad, are you mad? Oh yeah, I'm mad. My daughter put God's still small voice under her ear. It's a beautiful thing. What she would say if she were standing here is there's some ambiguity in that. Sometimes there are still small voices that you should not listen to. Do you ever hear these voices in your head? Just because you hear a voice in your head doesn't mean it is of God. There are voices in my head sometimes that are all about self-doubt. You don't need to condemn me. I can condemn myself. We have doubts that whisper to us in our head. Coveting is just a voice whispering to you in your head, like, you don't have that, you need that. Look what that guy's got, you need that. It's a voice whispering in your ear that you should not listen to. Still small voice. Today, I want to focus, out of the many things we could talk about, on what Elijah says 3 times in the story. When Cameron read it, translated in English, 3 times, Elijah says, it is enough. That's 4 syllables, 3 words. In the Hebrew, it's just 1 syllable, 1 word, and it is Rav. I picture Elijah sort of, croaking this, Rav, it is enough. It is enough. 3 thoughts on this. 1. On Monday of this past week, what an honor. I got a great speaking invitation. I was asked to speak at the opening gathering of our vacation Bible school. I warned my leaders, I can talk in a church, but put me in front of a bunch of children, it's just not my gift. They said, oh, no, we want you to come. I proved myself right. But what happened is I get to the room in time and I discover I don't talk first. First, there's actually this video. So the video starts and, oh my God, it's like fast-paced and loud. And they're singing about the man in the wilderness, and it just looks like it's just tremendous fun, but it's really fast and loud, and there's dancing, and it's like, what overstimulation. And then the video stops, and here's Dr. Howell. And I had this sense that I better be loud and fast and jump up and down and wear something. Do you see what? And I walked out of there thinking, oh, that was a disaster. And I came to my office and I put my finger on a book by Neil Postman, social commentator, and the name of the book explains it. It's called Amusing Ourselves to Death. Amusing Ourselves to Death. It's a book in which Postman asks the question of what happens when news, politics, and religion becomes entertainment. And when it becomes entertainment, all those news, politics, and religion, we've lost our souls. He was a secular Jew, Neil Postman. He wrote this: I believe I'm not mistaken in saying that Christianity is a demanding and serious religion. When it is delivered as easy and amusing, it is another kind of religion altogether. I could lament how children are overstimulated and over-entertained. And if you're old and grumpy, you'd probably nod your head and say, yeah, it's true for us old people as well. Something's always on. It's got to be faster. It's got to be more amusing. It's got to be more interesting. It's just the bar can never be high enough. We have our smartphones, and we're just like addicted to them because I'm available. If you're always available, you're never available. I worry about children, I worry about grown-ups, that we're amusing ourselves to death. We're amusing ourselves into a big separation from God. We're amusing ourselves into a big separation from wisdom and truth. Christianity won't be had when it's fast and slick and entertaining. It's not God. God's had in what Elijah understands. God's not in the fire. God's not in the storm. God's in the still small voice, cold mamad daka, which might even be translated utter silence. God's in the quiet. Thomas Merton said, let us have quiet homes. I've told this to people, and they said, that's just not possible. Let us have quiet homes. Second thing, this one's short. Elijah croaks, "Ah, it is enough." There's out that says that he is fed by a raven. That's pretty interesting. What did the raven bring him to eat? It does not specify. I doubt it was a 5-course Italian feast, right? I doubt the raven brought Elijah a steak, like which is what I hope to get tonight. My kids are coming for dinner, I think, right? But what he probably got was just a little bit of food, because a raven couldn't carry much. The Bible lesson for the children the other day was about the manna, after all, which is not a big feast. It's just a little bread. And they eat that same little bread every day, day after day after day. It's manna again, manna again. This reminded me of another rabbi, David Wolfe, who wrote this beautiful book, and right toward the end, he said this thing that just stuck with me. He said, it's so easy to be grateful for something that is unusual. You get a gift. It's Christmas. You move into a new house. I mean, whatever. Somebody does something special for you, and you write a thank you note. You're just so grateful for something that is unusual. He said the secret of life and what's way harder is being grateful for what is always there. Being grateful for what is always there. Like the last breath that you took. Gravity is still working. Someone has stuck with you. Being grateful for what is always there. Here's the main thing I want to focus on today. Elijah comes along at a time that Jezebel is the queen and Ahab is the king. And they are rulers in a society that is a disaster. It is a mess. It's corrupt. It's like worse than the world today, if you can imagine such a thing. And Elijah, looking at all that's going on with the world is a mess. You hear him complaining about it, and he says, Rob, it is enough. It is enough. And then he finds himself in the silence. I've been trying to think about what we should do in a world that is a mess. What we typically do, right, is we complain about it. We find fault. We hear whispering in our head about what's wrong with other people and so on. Maybe what God's inviting us into is silence. Maybe God wants us to listen. To listen. Today's June 19th, and that has been contracted now to Juneteenth. And Juneteenth is, of course, the observance of that day. This is so interesting. We have instant news now, but when the Civil War ended, they didn't have that. So Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox in April, and come June in Texas, they didn't know the war was over, and they're still fighting. But on June the 19th, General Gordon Granger rode into Galveston, and from the balcony of the Ashton Villa, he read General Order Number 3, which said that the slaves are free. That's really moving to me to think about. You know, the early church, they didn't have Bibles, even churches. People gathered in homes, or they heard it in the marketplace or on the street. And somebody told the story of Jesus. God became flesh, died, raised. Hearing the news about freedom for the first time, that must have been amazing. What we've done with Juneteenth, you see, is what Americans do with everything. We ruin it by politicizing it. So there are those I know who say, oh, June 19th, that's the most wonderful holiday. It's such a sacred day. Oh, and they're so excited and they're so proud of their progressive credentials. And there are those who grouse about June 19th. That shouldn't be a holiday. And they're so proud of their conservative credentials. And God is impressed by neither. What I would suggest for the people of God is that on something like Juneteenth, maybe we just listen. Maybe we listen. See, what I read about this, I studied up on it. Gordon Granger came in and read General Order Number 3, that the slaves are free. They were really giddy and excited about it, so they took off. And the mayor of Galveston wouldn't have it, so he rounded up the police and the soldiers, and they chased down those ex-slaves who had escaped and brought them back to their masters. See, maybe instead of saying, well, we had the civil rights movement, Lyndon Johnson passed legislation, whatever it is that we want to say, maybe we just listen to people. What's it like? What's it like? Here's the main thing, not about Juneteenth. It's this. I drove back last night. Lisa and I came back from an annual conference. If you're a lifelong Methodist, this is like an annual meeting. We have it up at Lake Junaluska, really pretty place. And conference is always great fun to me, mostly because, a lot of things happen. I see old friends. This time it was a challenge because the people I'd not laid eyes on in 3 years were all trying, you look older, your name is, we're doing this thing, of course. And at annual conference, we have great worship and music, and that's tremendous fun. We mark our clergy colleagues and their spouses who have died in the past year. And that's always moving. But the other thing we do at annual conference that makes it a little bit tedious and hard to sit through for somebody like me with a short attention span is we do the business of the denomination. We engage in, we do budgets, we do policies, we do all this stuff. And it can just be so like laborious and tedious. And for somebody who might have to hang on for dear life, my buddy Shane Page used to sit across the room for me. And we'd be in some just mortifying debate over some little budget item. And he would text me. And the text would simply say, another unintended consequence of the resurrection. Right? It's like, Jesus is risen, we're going to do this. That was always funny. One of the things we were doing this year at annual conference, if you've been tracking the Methodist denomination, is we have for a long time been in conversations about who's included, who's blessed by the church. And we're about to have a bit of a separation in our beautiful family over LGBTQIA plus inclusion. And we're debating this up there for a while. There's some legal things. It's known as an issue. An issue is never an issue. An issue is always people. So here's the most amazing thing that happened to me at annual conference. I ran into a woman who had been a parishioner of mine back in the 80s. I did not recognize her. She did not recognize me. It was kind of cool. And we started talking, and she said, oh, I was in your church. I was a pastor here in Charlotte back in the 80s. Oh, you were in that church. She was a young single woman at the time. We didn't have many of those. That was kind of cool. And so I said, what have you been doing since I last saw you? You know, a lot of years have passed. She said, well, shortly after I left Charlotte, when you were still pastor there, I got married. I said, oh, cool. She said, I had a son. I said, I was trying to do the math. I said, how old is he? She said, he would have been 30. He would have been 30. I said, tell me about that. She said his name is Ben. They were a very serious church family. She had been serious in my church. She married a church guy. They were always in church. And she said, Ben loved church. He always wanted to be there. He wanted to go to Sunday school. He wanted to sit in worship services. He wanted to sing in the choir. He wanted to go to Bible studies. He wanted to go on mission trips. He wanted to go to church service days. He just wanted to be in the church. He loved church. It was his happy place. It was his safe place. When he was in high school, the youth minister one night, with all the teenagers there gathered around, called him out and said, Ben, are you gay? He'd never told anybody, but he did. He said, yes, I'm gay. The youth minister went on a little rant about hating the sin but loving the sinner. He suggested to Ben that if he didn't change, he would not go to heaven. Ben quit going to church, went into a tailspin, and took his own life. His mother, the woman I'm talking to, and her husband quit going to church for many years, understandably. Finally, a couple of years ago, she met my daughter, the one with the tattoo, who's a pastor. Sarah said, you can come to my church. You will be loved. And she came. She's gotten real involved. Her husband, the dad, people say, Happy Father's Day. He's not having a happy Father's Day. He's never shaken what happened. He's vowed he will never be in church again. Will never be in church again. I found myself that evening at a worship service that the conference had, and I noticed I was sitting behind this mom, and I thought, well, that's exactly right. I'm sitting behind her. I am behind her. I am with her. I'll fight anybody who says her son should not be in church or is not going to heaven. I'm sitting behind her. Yesterday at a conference, we do this every year, the Duke alums, who are the coolest clergy in the conference. Of course, we have a lunch. And at that lunch, some of us were talking and reminiscing, and some of us started talking about my favorite professor there named Roland Murphy. I've mentioned him to you before, most important man in my life. Meant so much to me. Roland is interesting. He taught Old Testament, and he died on the feast day of Elijah. Like, he loved the prophet Elijah. You think about Elijah's ties to Jesus. You know, by the way, at the Transfiguration, Elijah's there. On the cross, the people mocking Jesus, they come in and they say, "Are you Elijah?" Like, Elijah gets tied to all that. Jesus wasn't Elijah, but what he was doing there in the silence, broken only by his saying, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" He's giving himself for all of us who are so broken and so confused and so sinful in ways that we don't even understand and so very lost. Somebody yesterday asked me, what's your fondest memory of Roland Murphy? And I don't know why I landed on what I did. I suspect it's because I knew one of my closest friends here yesterday was going in for a lung transplant. at Duke. Got news at 6 a.m. this morning. He made it. Successful. So happy. What I remembered was my friend named Nathaniel, who had cystic fibrosis when we were at Duke. She died at 23 years old. They didn't know how to do lung transplants back then. I got the news that she had died, and I never lost anybody my age before, so I was walking to Father Murphy's office to give him the news. He was in the hallway, and I saw him, and I just, so broken, said, Father Murphy, Daniel died this morning. And what I remembered was that in that moment, he was tall. He reached down, put his arm around me, and said, she's with God. She's with God. Doesn't seem like a brilliant memory, but then on the other hand, it's kind of everything, isn't it? In my devotional reading last week, I was reading a chapter by this in a book I really like, by a guy who's talking about God's will and how we tend to say, oh, God's will is always done, God's in control, horrible things happen. It's not God's will. Here's what he said that I underlined and pondered the rest of the day. He wrote, we must patiently endure until God's will is finally and fully done. We must patiently endure until God's will is finally and fully done. At first, this really depressed me, I have to tell you, because I want God to get with it and make things better now. I want God's kingdom to come now, and I want to be part of that. But the fact is, God doesn't control. God waits on us to love. We must patiently endure until God's will is finally and fully done. And the longer I thought about that in the quiet, I thought, what could be more hopeful? What could be truer? It's not a fast and happy song. It's waiting in the silence. Be still and know that I am God, and that God's will be done. In the meantime, ours is to listen, not to judge, not to listen to all those voices in our head, but stay in the silence with God, to come to church and to sit behind others. We're tempted to give up, who have suffered much. Ours is not to do as Elijah did and increase their suffering. Ours is to love, to be with them, just as God is with us. Thanks be to God.